It started with a sound that could peel paint off the walls, a bark so deep, so primal, that the entire North Point Precinct 7 just froze. We weren't rookies, man. We handle situations. But every single officer, even old Sarge Miller who fought in Nam, backed away, terrified because the German Shepherd chained in the far kennel wasn't just a dog, he was a living, breathing nightmare. We called him Grindel, after that monster in the old story. And trust me, he earned it. Grindel was known as the most aggressive, unpredictable canine the entire county had ever seen. His growls didn't just echo, they vibrated through the concrete floor, a low, constant warning. Stay away. Every handler who tried to touch him, every vet who tried to treat him, walked away with scars, physical and, let me tell you, deep emotional ones. Grindel had been the pride of the Mountain Watch K-9 unit. A legend, they said, partnered with Sergeant Kalen Thorne. They were inseparable, the kind of bond you only read about in history books. They'd saved God knows how many lives in the field. But 3 years ago, during an operation in the Blackwood Territory, Kalen was lost, a tragic sudden event. And Grindel? He didn't just survive, he shattered. Since that day, he had turned. The loyal soldier was replaced by a furious, grief-stricken beast. He refused food, attacked handlers, and his eyes, they were always sharp, unblinking, filled with something darker than anger. It was pure, untethered heartbreak. He'd been bounced from 4 precincts, and a last transfer report, stamped high risk, unrehabilitable, landed on my desk. My name is Detective Alex Morrow. I've been working with canines for 15 years, bomb tech, search and rescue, you name it. I love these dogs, they're my life, but when I looked at Grindel's file, I just shook my head. The man I reported to, Chief Barrett, was standing there, arms folded, looking grim. Morrow, Barrett said, his voice flat. The brass gave us one last week. If you can't assess him, if you can't show any sign of control, he's done. We all knew what done meant. It was a cold, cruel word for a dog who'd risked everything for us. I looked out at the rain hitting the precinct window, a cold, sterile world, just like Grendel's kennel. I felt the familiar pang of regret. I'd lost my own first partner, a beautiful Malinois named Atlas, years ago, and I swore I'd never get close to that kind of pain again. Why risk my heart on a lost cause? Chief, I sighed, running a hand over my face. With all due respect, I'm a detective, not a miracle worker. This isn't a training issue. It's a soul problem. He's unpredictable. He's dangerous. Barrett leaned in, lowering his voice. He's Kalen's dog, Alex. Kalen Thorne saved my life twice. I owe him. And maybe, just maybe, this dog isn't asking for control. Maybe he's just asking for someone to listen. I took the file, walked down the long, cold corridor to the fortified K-9 wing. The metal doors, the reinforced bars. It was less a kennel, more a solitary confinement cell. Grindel paced in circles, the clicking of his claws a relentless, ticking clock. When I stood behind the safety glass, his eyes snapped to mine, and for a split second, I saw it. Not rage, but deep, bottomless grief. I spent the next 3 days just watching. Watching the pacing, the flinching at loud noises, the desperate, haunting howls at night for a voice that would never answer. We tried everything. Calming scent, different voices, specialized food. Nothing. Every handler that tried to approach was met with a violent, muzzle-snapping lunge. He was a ticking bomb, and the clock was running out. On the 4th morning, the precinct was quiet, the air thick with failure. I was talking to the shift officer, Diaz, about the termination paperwork. God, that word tasted like ash when the front doors opened. It was a woman in her early 30s, Mrs. Evelyn Thorne, Kalen's widow, holding a tiny hand. Beside her was a little girl, maybe 6, with bright blue eyes, clutching a faded, plush dinosaur, and wearing a ridiculous but adorable, puffy pink dress. Detective Morrow, Evelyn said softly, her eyes tired but kind. I heard Kalen's old unit was here. I just wanted to show Lila where her daddy worked. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. I apologized for her loss, the usual awkward cop words. While we talked, Lila, silent and curious, wandered a few steps away. Her eyes were fixed on the sign leading to the K9 wing. She tilted her head, hearing the faint, deep sound of a restless growl echoing from far down the hall. "Mommy," Lila whispered, tugging Evelyn's sleeve. "Is that a doggy?" "A sad doggy." "Yes, sweetheart." Evelyn smiled weakly. "Police dogs? But we can't go in there. It's too noisy." Lila just nodded, but her gaze never left that hallway. I didn't think much of it, just a curious kid. But at that exact moment, down the hall, something shifted. I was standing near Grendel's kennel, just watching him pace. Suddenly, his ears shot up. His pacing stopped dead. His body went rigid, muscles tightening, but the rage didn't come. Instead, a low, soft, questioning whine escaped his throat. I frowned. "What is it, boy?" Then, through the narrow security panel on the door, I saw her. A tiny splash of pink against the gray, utilitarian concrete. Lila Thorne, standing just outside the restricted zone, her wide, innocent blue eyes meeting the amber, grief-stricken eyes of the beast. "Wait!" I shouted, rushing toward the door, my heart vaulting into my throat. But Lila was already walking closer, her small hand reaching for the latch. Grendel stood motionless. He just watched her, his eyes locked on hers, not with anger this time, but with an intense, familiar focus. I reached the door, adrenaline surging, ready to tackle her, when the heavy latch clicked. The reinforced steel door creaked open, just enough for the little girl to step inside. Every officer who heard the sound, and believe me, they all heard it, tensed. One wrong move, one loud sound, and the dog behind that door would rip her apart. I froze at the threshold. Grendel's posture was rigid, coiled, ready to strike, and that deep growl rumbled in his chest, vibrating through the air. "Lila!" Evelyn's voice cracked from the hallway, running full tilt. But the little girl didn't run. She didn't scream. She just stood there, clutching her plastic dinosaur, eyes wide but utterly calm. "Hi," she whispered, her voice like a tiny bell. Grendel blinked. The growl faltered. His massive head tilted slightly, confusion flickering in his amber eyes. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not since Kalen. That gentle, innocent trust. It was a scent he hadn't smelled in years. Lila took another step forward, her voice barely a breath. "It's okay, doggy. I know you're sad." The words hung in the air, a thin, fragile thread connecting two broken worlds. Grendel's breathing slowed. The tension in his shoulders eased. The beast everyone feared stood perfectly still, caught between the instinct to defend himself and the desperate, burning need to remember what kindness felt like. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched, my hand hovering near my tranquilizer gun, watching the untouchable dog allow a child to approach him. Lila crouched slowly, placing her dinosaur on the floor. "He's nice too," she said, pushing it toward him. "You can smell him if you want." Grendel tilted his head again. His tail twitched, a tiny, confused flicker. Then, slowly, cautiously, he took a single, agonizing step forward. His claws clicked on the concrete. The metal of his muzzle glinted under the fluorescent light. Lila smiled. "Good boy." She reached out, her small hand trembling just a little, and pressed her fingers gently against the cold steel bars of his inner cage. Grendel froze. For one long, shattering heartbeat, time stopped. Then, he lowered his head. With a quiet, shaky breath, he pressed his nose, the tip of his snout, against her tiny fingers. A soft, mournful whine escaped his throat. It wasn't a threat. It was a sound of surrender, a sound so fragile it broke through every barrier between them. Gasps erupted behind the safety glass. Every officer who saw it was stunned into silence. The beast who had lunged at grown men allowed a child to touch him. Grendel closed his eyes for a moment, as if surrendering to a long-lost memory. From that second on, something inside him began to heal. Evelyn, finally catching up, rushed in, panic etched across her face. "Lila, sweetheart, step back. That's a dangerous dog." Lila turned and smiled brightly. "No, Mommy, he's not dangerous. He's sad." Evelyn froze. She saw the creature everyone feared standing quietly in front of her child, eyes softer than she could have ever imagined. When Lila turned to leave, Grindel let out another soft, pleading whine. It wasn't aggression. It was longing. He didn't want her to go. That afternoon, I stayed in the observation room, replaying the security footage again and again. I had trained dozens of canines, but I had never seen anything like this. Grindel hadn't reacted to Lila like a stranger. He had reacted like he recognized her. I leaned closer to the screen, pausing the footage at the moment Grindel pressed his muzzle to her fingers. Pain and love tangled together in his eyes. "What did you see in her, boy?" I whispered. For the first time since Grindel arrived, I felt a deep certainty. This wasn't a case to be solved with a leash and a shock collar. This was a mystery written in the language of the heart. I couldn't shake the look of sorrow in his eyes when she left. Like he'd lost Kalen all over again. Against all protocol, I marched into Chief Barrett's office. "Let her come back, Chief," I said, my voice firm. Barrett stared at me. "Are you insane, Morrow? That child was inches away from losing a hand. I'd lose my badge, my career, everything." "I know," I replied. "But she didn't. He trusts her. He needs her. If there's even a 1 in a million chance this can save him, we have to try. Give me 24 hours. Barrett looked at me for a long, terrible moment, then sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "One visit. Supervised. And Morrow, if anything, and I mean anything, goes wrong, you take the fall." By the next afternoon, Evelyn brought Lila back. The moment Grindel saw her, everything in the kennel changed. His ears perked, his tail lifted slightly, and his eyes looked alive. "Hi, Grindel," Lila said softly, as if greeting an old friend. "I missed you." The giant dog tilted his head, a faint rumble of joy in his throat. When she crouched near the bars, he pressed his muzzle forward instantly, like he'd been waiting for this exact second. I watched amazed. Each visit grew easier. Within days, Grindel began responding not just to Lila's voice, but to commands. When she said sit, he obeyed. When she smiled, his tail thumped against the floor. The violent tension that once defined him slowly, miraculously, melted away. He started eating regularly, sleeping calmly, barking less. "You won't believe it," Diaz said one evening, shaking his head. I passed by the wing, and he actually wagged his tail at me. I thought I was hallucinating. I chuckled, but my eyes stayed on Grindel. He's remembering what it means to trust again. Lila visited every day. She brought crayon drawings, sketches of her, her mom, and Grindel standing together under a bright yellow sun. She taped them near his kennel. Grindel would stare at them for minutes, like he understood every single line. But something still nagged at me. There was a deeper connection here, a familiarity in the way the dog looked at her, as though he knew her from another life, a life before the trauma. It wasn't just trust, it was recognition. One evening, long after the precinct had emptied, I sat in my office, flipping through Grindel's old military records again. The file was thick, faded, full of mission logs and commendations. Buried in the back was a folded photograph. I unfolded it carefully. It was Sergeant Kalen Thorne kneeling beside a younger, brighter-eyed Grindel. Standing next to them was Evelyn, holding a toddler with pigtails and a dress that looked suspiciously like pink. My heart stopped. I turned the photo over. Written on the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Grindel, Daddy's brave partner. Love, Lila." The world seemed to freeze. Lila, the little girl who had calmed the most dangerous dog on the force, the one they called the Beast, was the daughter of his fallen handler. The pieces slammed into place. Grindel's whines, the instant bond, the recognition. He hadn't just sensed kindness. He had remembered his family. He hadn't seen a stranger. He had seen the last piece of the man he loved. The next morning, I found Evelyn waiting in the lobby. I hesitated, then asked gently, "Mrs. Thorne, did your husband's partner, was he always called Grindel?" Her eyes softened. "No, his original name was Rex. Kalen said it meant king in Latin. But after Kalen, they changed his name. Said he was a different dog. He never forgot, Evelyn," I whispered, the weight of the realization pressing down on me. "That dog, he never forgot his family. He remembered your daughter from the moment he saw her." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as she looked toward the hallway. At that very moment, Lila was kneeling by the kennel, giggling softly while Rex, Grindle, pressed his head against the bars. He remembers us. Evelyn choked out, her voice trembling. And for the first time in years, Rex lifted his eyes, not in fear, not in pain, but in recognition of the only family he had left. The soldier was home, but the story wasn't over. Not yet, because fate, as it always does, had one final, terrifying test waiting for them. And it was brewing just outside the precinct walls. That night, the city of North Point was swallowed by a violent, terrible storm, the kind that makes you pull your curtains shut and pray. Rain hammered against rooftops. Wind howled through the empty streets, and the thunder rolled like distant explosions. For Rex, the sound wasn't just noise, it was a memory. The desert, the gunfire, the searing flash of the IED, and the silence that followed Kalen's scream. Rex, deep in his kennel, jolted awake. His ears shot up, his body trembling uncontrollably. Lightning flashed, painting the walls in blinding white bursts. The trauma response hit him like a physical blow. He began pacing, panting wildly, his claws scraping the floor in frantic rhythm. Officer Diaz, working the graveyard shift, noticed it on the security monitor. Moro, he called over the intercom, his voice laced with fear. Your boy's losing it in there. He's not responding to the sound machine. I was already grabbing my jacket. It's the storm, Diaz. It's the trauma. He can't handle loud noises. But before I could reach the K9 wing, another flash of lightning hit the transformer right outside the precinct. The thunderclap that followed was deafening. Startled beyond reason, Rex lunged at the kennel door with every ounce of his massive strength. The heavy locking bolt, reinforced steel, snapped clean. The door swung open with a shriek of tortured metal. He was gone in a blur of fur and fear, a ghost fleeing a memory. By the time I reached the empty cage, rainwater was already blowing in through the open hallway door. Damn it, Rex! I roared, running into the pouring night, the rain instantly soaking me through. Meanwhile, across town, Evelyn and Lila were driving home from a late pharmacy run. A simple errand, one last trip before the storm got too bad, when their minivan stalled near the old, rickety Willow Creek Bridge. The rain was coming down in literal sheets. "We'll wait it out, honey," Evelyn said, forcing a calm she didn't feel, trying the ignition again. Nothing. Lila, however, was staring out the fogged window, her eyes wide. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Rex, he's outside." Evelyn blinked. "Sweetheart, that's just the storm making shapes." But before she could finish, a massive, dark shape appeared in the flashing light of a lightning strike. A German shepherd, drenched, panting, eyes wide with terror and confusion. Rex stood in the middle of the road, looking straight at their car. "Rex," Evelyn breathed, disbelief and terror battling in her voice. The dog barked once, a sharp, urgent, non-aggressive sound, then turned, running toward the dense, rain-slicked woods nearby. Lila, driven by an instinct far older than herself, didn't hesitate. "He wants us to follow," she yelled, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Lila, no," Evelyn screamed, but the little girl had already opened the car door and dashed into the maelstrom. Evelyn screamed her daughter's name, chasing after her into the blinding rain. My police radio crackled just as I reached the main road, a few blocks from the Willow Creek Bridge. Report of a child missing near Willow Creek. Possible connection to runaway K9. My blood ran cold. I slammed my foot on the gas. Somewhere out there, a terrified little girl and a broken dog had run straight into the heart of the storm. I sped through flooded streets, the cruiser tires slicing through water. "Hold on, Rex," I muttered, teeth gritted. "Don't do anything stupid. You're almost home." Deep in the woods, Lila stumbled through the mud, the pink dress soaked and heavy. "Rex," she cried, her small voice trembling. "Where are you?" A sharp, clear bark answered from the distance. Lila followed the sound, slipping, falling, then pushing herself up again with a tenacity that surprised even me when I heard the story later. When she reached a small, muddy clearing, she finally saw him, standing tall against the wind, soaked and shaking, but alive. "Rex!" she shouted in relief, throwing her arms around his wet, shaking neck. "You found me." But Rex wasn't calm. His ears were twitching furiously, his body tense. He barked sharply again, facing the direction behind her. Lightning flashed, and that's when she saw it. A massive, decades-old oak tree, its roots undermined by the floodwaters, teetering dangerously over the small slope where she stood. Before she could react, the earth beneath her feet gave way. The muddy ground collapsed, pulling her down toward the ravine below. She screamed, a small, terrified sound swallowed by the thunder. But before she hit the bottom, Rex lunged. He caught the back of her jacket in his powerful jaws and dug his claws deep into the muddy ground, growling through the immense strain. Rain poured into his eyes. Mud splattered across his face. He refused to let go. Inch by inch, he pulled her up, his muscles trembling, his paws slipping on the wet clay. "Hold on, boy," Lila gasped, clutching his soaking fur. With one final, desperate heave, Rex yanked her to safety just as the massive tree crashed down behind them, splintering the earth where she had just been standing. The explosion of thunder echoed through the valley. Lila lay still, panting, her tiny hands gripping Rex's thick collar. "You saved me," she whispered. But Rex didn't move right away. He stood over her, chest heaving, ears pinned back. A deep, jagged cut ran along his side where a falling branch had grazed him when the tree went down. Blood mingled with the rain. Moments later, I burst through the trees, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "Lila!" I shouted, my voice raw with panic. "Here!" she cried weakly. "Rex saved me." I knelt beside them, pulling the trembling girl into my arms. Then my eyes fell on Rex, bleeding, limping, but still standing protectively over her. "Good boy, Rex," I whispered, my throat tight, tears mingling with the rainwater on my face. "You did it." Rex looked up at me, his eyes cloudy but calm, as if saying, "She's safe now." Then his body finally gave out, and he collapsed into the mud. "Hang on, buddy," I said, lifting him with trembling, careful arms. "We're not losing you tonight. Not after that." The steady hum of machines filled the brightly lit hospital corridor. The storm had passed, leaving behind that strange, heavy kind of quiet that follows chaos. I sat outside the emergency room, soaked and shivering, my hands clenched. Across from me, Evelyn held Lila close, her eyes red from crying. Rex had been rushed into surgery minutes after we arrived. The wound was deep, and he'd lost a lot of blood. "Mommy," Lila whispered, her voice small and shaky. "He's going to be okay, right?" "He's strong, sweetheart," Evelyn murmured, brushing a tear from her daughter's cheek. "He saved you. He won't give up now." I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. This dog, this broken soldier, had finally found his reason to live again, found his family, and then risked everything to save them. Hours passed. The door finally opened, and a tired-looking vet in scrubs stepped out. "He's stable," she said, her voice gentle. "The wound was deep, but he's a fighter. He's resting now." Lila shot to her feet. "Can I see him?" The vet smiled softly. "Just for a minute." The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet fur. Machines beeped softly beside the table where Rex lay, wrapped in thick bandages, breathing slow and steady. His eyes fluttered open. The moment he saw her, his tail gave a weak, happy thump against the stainless steel table. I stood in the doorway with Evelyn, tears glistening. Lila leaned close and hugged Rex gently around the neck. "You came back," she whispered, "just like Daddy always said you would." Rex gave a soft, reassuring whine, pressing his head against her shoulder. The exact same sound Kalen Thorne used to describe, the one Rex made when he was fully at peace. "He remembers," Evelyn whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He never forgot," I reply, my throat tight. The storm had taken its toll, but what it left behind was a bond made unbreakable by love, memory, and fate. 2 months later, the world looked very different. The snow had begun to fall gently over North Point. A small crowd of officers gathered near the flagpole, their uniforms crisp. At the center stood me, Evelyn, and little Lila, and beside them, wearing a polished silver badge on his new collar, was Rex. No longer Grendel, no longer the beast, just Rex. Chief Barrett stepped forward, his voice full of emotion. Today, we honor a soldier who reminded us what loyalty truly means. Rex, for bravery beyond duty and for saving a child's life. We hereby name you an honorary officer of the North Point Police Department. Applause broke through the crisp winter air. Lila clapped the loudest, her laughter cutting through the morning like sunlight. I knelt beside Rex, scratching behind his ear. "You did it, buddy," I murmured. "You finally found home again." Rex tilted his head, then looked toward Evelyn and Lila, his new family, before pressing his nose against my palm in quiet gratitude. Evelyn joined me, watching Lila run circles around Rex, his tail wagging gently. "You know, Alex," she said softly, "I think Kalen would have been proud." "Maybe he wasn't waiting for Kalen anymore," I said, watching the dog. "Maybe he was just waiting for you too." As the sun began to set, turning the sky gold and pink, Lila sat beside Rex on the station steps, leaning against him, her tiny fingers buried in his thick fur. The badge on his collar gleamed like a medal of honor. Rex lifted his head toward the horizon, ears perked, eyes bright. For the first time in years, his world wasn't filled with thunder or fear. It was filled with peace. And beside him, the little girl who healed his broken heart whispered, "Welcome home, Rex."